Welcome back to Forging a Minecraft Mod, lecture number 4, blocks and tile entity. So before the break we set up a basic block with a simple tile entity that ticked down 100 ticks and then it spread out. We also, just before the break, we also made sure that it had a different texture if it had already spread, or in other words, the timer was below 0. We also made sure that it saved and loaded the data properly when the world shut down and restarted again. But we had a few problems. Well, apart from Eclipse not importing things properly, I restarted it by now, we also had a problem of the following. That it's night. No, that's not the problem. The problem would be that now they have all the correct color, but if we remove these again and allow it to spread out once more, we're going to see that it's not spreading well. The icons of the block is not updating properly. There we see that it's updated and then it updated again, so now it's actually working there. So last time we saw that it actually didn't work, but we'll see in the corners it won't work here either. So it will still be the well, look like that in the end. Well, we can fix that by doing it like so. So I'm just updating them, and as you can see, those actually change depending on these. So some updates there will fix it, but we're going to do this properly. We're going to make sure that it updates, but we're also going to do one more thing. Right, so how do we do this? Well, let's head over to the tile entity bomb. Here we go. What we have here is two timers, really. It might look like one timer, but we have two. We have one on the client side and one on the server side. The client side one, well, it just ticks down, and when it reaches 0, it's going to change the icon, because that's what we're checking. We're checking if the timer is less than 0, but since we're just doing graphics on the client side, that's basically the timer we check. On the server side, we use it to spread. These two timers do not have to be synchronized. Well, we tell them to take 100 times each, so it should be the same, right? Well, yeah, we tell them that, but the world might tick in a different rate than the client, due to lag or some other issues, but probably because of lag they might not go at the same rate. That means that the spread doesn't have to be synchronized with the icon change. So what we might want to do is to make sure that the server keeps the ticking going, whereas the client just gets information from the server when it should change the icon. I think that sounds like a good plan. So how do I change this? Well, a very easy solution would be to just say, well, if we are on the server, then do the ticking and everything. So I just moved the server check up a bit, like so. Like that. So now it's not going to tick on the client side at all, so it's not going to change the icon at any point. So that's an issue. But we'll have to make sure that it knows about that. So what we want to do is send something called the client event, and we want to send that to the client so it knows, well, I should update and change. And this is not something special for tile entities. We can use this for any blocks, but it might come quite in handy for our tile entities. And when we have that, we want to add a block event, and here we have a lot of parameters, but the first one is just the first ones, I should say, are the coordinates. So we have x1, not x again, there you go. And the next one is just the ID of the block, so we can just refer to it like so. And then we have two other parameters. So what should they be? Well, I'm going to set them to 1 and 0. And what these are basically an ID of the event we're sending and an extra value that we want to send along. So these values could be set to anything, and we can treat them as anything. We'll see exactly what that means, because we're going to implement a method here called, well, we want to override it, but it's going to be called receive client event. and what we get is an ID and a value, and this ID and this value is, well, what we send along here. So if we send 1 and 0, when we receive it, we'll receive 1 and 0. So that means that we can send multiple informations. Just tell it, well, now we send value type 1, so we set the ID to 1, and then we give a value, and then we do something with the value depending on the ID, and then we might want to send some other information. We send it with ID 2, so then we send it some other value. Then we might want to update the value of type 1, so then we send it with the ID 1 again and give it a new value. So we can use these two values for whatever we want. But it's a bit weird. What's going on here is actually, when we call this add block event, is that it's just going to happen on the server side. So it's very weird. We tell it, well, add a block event, but it's just going to happen on the server side. So why would we do this? To be honest, I'm not really sure why you would do this, but if you do return true here, it's making sure that after it has been processed on the server, it's also going to go all the way to the client side and do everything there that it's supposed to do. If we return false, it's just going to end on the server and not do anything. I'm not entirely sure. We might want to process on the server and make sure that we don't send any invalid information. I don't know. But if we return true, it goes to the client as well. Otherwise, it will only go on the server. Right, so what do we want to do later on? Well, if the world object is remote, so that we actually are on the client side, and the ID is number 1, so we have event 1. That's what we're sending there. Then we can use that to modify the timer, because we still have the timer on the client side, it's just not ticking. So for instance, if the value equals 0, that might mean, well, we are not active anymore. And active, well, when we're not active, we might just want to set the timer to -1. That's the same as not being active. It's below 0. And otherwise, if we send like value 1 for making it reactivate again, we might want to send timer equals 100 there. And in the end, what we want to do is make sure that everything updates properly. Come on. Oh. There you go. Spell it properly. And what I'm going to use is something called mark block for update and give it the coordinates like that. And what that's going to do is tell it, well, something has probably happened, so you might want to re-render this block. So we're going to tell the world that next time that you're going to re-render things, make sure that this is going to be re-rendered as well. And that's just to make sure that it's not using an old cache of the information. So it's actually regenerating the graphics for this block. And this is all happening on the server, not server side, on the client side. So on the client side, we only care about which icon to use. So the timer will either be -1 or 100, whereas the server is actually the one ticking. So now we will have a synchronized tick on the client side. What we could do if we wanted to would be have it ticking on the client side as well, and just once in a while make sure that the server sends the current tick state, like we're currently at 50 for instance, and then the client would make sure to change it to that. Then we would simulate the ticking on the client side and then just make sure that it's not far off once in a while. But we only have it on the server side, and then the server, when the spread happens, it tells the client that, well, you should update, well, your timer should set to -1, we're done here, it should be idle now. And yeah, that's basically it. The client is not ticking. Oops, there you go. Okay, so now it just looks weird here because, well, we're changing things spread, and therefore some blocks will update to the new code, and you know. So now if I place it here, it should update properly. There you go. So even though the client doesn't tick at all, it doesn't decrease the timer, it still is changing icons. That's because when the server spreads one block, it's telling the client, I just updated this block, you should change the icon. Sweet. And let's see if the corners behave, and they did. We do have a problem though. We always have problems. Let's take a look. So they should look properly right. No, they didn't. So they just reverted back. Why did they revert back? Well, what's happening is the following. If we close down and take a look. When we are done with the spreading, we send in a client event to the client so it can update its texture. When we load the world again, we load the information. So why isn't this working? Well, think about it like this. If you join a server, your friend's server, do you save the world with your client? No, you do just join the server and get some information while you're playing, and then you disconnect. The world itself is saved on the server side. So these write to NBT and read from NBT, those are only used on the server side. That means that the client won't have a clue of what the timer is. The timer will be reset on the client side. The client side won't tick, so they will always be 100 until we add this block event. Of course, we're never doing that because the server knows that we've already spread properly. So how do we do this? Well, we could of course send some information from the server when we load it. Right, add some information here. First of all, that wouldn't work because we don't have access to the world object properly because everything haven't been loaded yet. But that's not our big problem. Our big problem is this is when the server loads. The server loads and reads some information from the NBT. If we join with the client at the same time, maybe we play in single player, we still have a server and a client, then the server is going to be creating itself a bit before we can join. The server starts and then we can join. So when we read the information from the NBT, the client won't exist yet. So therefore we can't send the information to the client. Or think about it like this. You join your friend's server, the server might have been up for 24 hours already when you join. It sent that information 24 hours ago. Of course you didn't receive it. You're pretty late. So what we'll have to do is actually tell the client to send in a request to the server. We send a packet of some sort, and the server then, when we request the information, it sends it back. So how would we do this? Well, we could use the packet handler that we set up in the first lecture, and tell the client to ask the server for information, and the server sends the information back. That allows us to get the information just when we need it, because otherwise, like I said, if the server sends it out when it starts, we might be 24 hours late. However, why do things that are more complex if we can do it easier? We're going to take a look on packets next lecture, but we don't actually need them at the moment. So how can we do this in a very clever way? We want to make sure that we get the information on the client side even after we've loaded the world. Well, actually we don't need this. I'm going to do it in a much more clever way. That way is a bit restricted, so if we can't use that way, we'll obviously have to do what I just did with the client events, and then make sure that the client asks for the information and sends it along and everything. But for what I'm going to use it, I can use this clever way. So what do we know about things that are synchronized properly on its own? Well, we work with something called metadata. Do you recognize that? Of course we can still use metadata even though we use tile entities. So what I'm going to do is doing something that is quite simple. When we reach this point that it's going to spread, then we can go and say that, well, set the block metadata at x code, y code, and so on, and then the metadata 1 update flag tag 3. Well, that's just a flag, we just leave it as 3, but the new metadata will be 1. So what we do here is that we update the metadata. So we're sort of doing the same thing. We're changing something when it has been spread so we can read that. But what's really going on is we're changing the metadata even though we use a tile entity, and that's totally fine. The good thing with this is, first of all, it's going to be synchronized to the client, sort of like when we did the block event there. Second of all, it's going to be saved. Third of all, it's going to be synchronized on the to the clients even when the client enters the world later on. So we won't get into that trouble when should we send the information. However, we're still restricted to these 16 different values. So if we need more information than just these 16, we can't of course use metadata in this instance. But when it's possible, why not do it? It's a very clever way of doing it. We can just set the metadata like so. But of course, note that we need a tile entity as well. The tile entity does things like counting this timer. We can't use the metadata for that. But we can use it on the client side to just define, well, we should change icon now. And how do we do this? Well, we've done it before. So instead of defining it like this, we define it like this. If I can get this correct, only side.client like that, and alright, derp. I'm just derping, don't mind that. We used the method we used the last time, which is the get icon one, where we get the side and the metadata. So instead of using the tile entity itself, we're using the metadata to sort of define the icon, even though the tile entity is controlling which metadata we're going to use. Like that. So observe that the old thing we did would be more expandable because we could use any values. We might have a lot of different icons that we want to use depending on a lot of different states. However, when we can, there's no reason to make it more advanced than we have to. We can use built-in functionalities. But like I've said, the old way of doing it is necessary in other cases, and that is also the case for the what's it called, the client events, the block client events. So even though we're not using them now, they are not useless, but in this specific instance, it's going to be much easier to just use the metadata at 0 or 1 depending on which icon to use. And remember, by default it's going to be metadata 0 if something else is defined, and therefore it should work properly. Observe that they have the wrong icons now because we haven't set their metadata, because, well, we just added that code. Here we go. So let's see. It's working so far. It's spreading and it's changing the icons because we set the metadata, and that will be used on the client side. So far so good. If we exit out and join again, boom, it will still have that information because we have saved it in metadata, and that's synchronized properly. If that wouldn't be synchronized properly by default, then we would see wool blocks that always reverted back to the white wool on the client side. At least we would see saplings always reverting back to oak. We would see redstone losing all its power graphically because all the metadata would be reset, and that's not the case. What we have is metadata that is being synchronized by the vanilla Minecraft code, so why not utilize that? Sweet! Awesome! So this is not good. This block is weird. It just spreads for an eternity. Let's make it stop. It should stop after a while, and that's going to show you a bit how we can interact between different tile entities, and it's not tricky at all. It's very easy. How can we interact with tile entities from different blocks? What I want to do is create another thing here called level, which level we're currently at. By default, we start at level 0, and then for each sort of level we spread out, it's going to increase. So if we have level 0 spreading, then it's to blocks with level 1. If those spread, they will spread to blocks with level 2, and so on. What we'll have to make sure is, of course, save it. We don't want it to lose this information when we load the world. The level is not going to be something that has a very high value, so I can even compress it, you might want to call it, I don't know, to a byte. So we just convert it to a byte, which is just, of course, 1 byte instead of 2, which is a short, or instead of 4, which is a full integer. As you can see, however, I'm actually using them as integers here to make it a bit easier. It's more important to keep it small when we save it compared to when we actually use it. And then just a matter of compound dot get, and remember to use the same thing. So we need to get a byte because we set a byte, and then we use the same name like so. So there you go. Now that has been saved as well. So it's very easy. Now we have a tile entity with 2 different values. So not only that we have values that are too high for metadata, we have 2 different values that are very easy to just keep apart by having them in different fields and saving and loading them. Okay. So how do we do this? What do we need to do? Well, it's fairly simple. If we make sure that the level is less than, for instance, 3, then it won't spread when it reaches level 3. However, we of course need to make sure that the level is increasing each time it spreads. And we can do that in the spread method. So when we set a block like this, a block of an ID that has a tile entity, it's going to be given a new instance of the tile entity, like I said before. So we will create a new tile entity, a new instance of it, and then we can refer to it, and that's going to happen right away. So we can actually refer to it right away. Tile entity bomb entity bomb, like this. So the same thing that we did before, and the same thing applies. What I said before is that we might want to actually make sure that this is correct. Well, tile entity, but it should be. We just created it like 1 line ago. But if we want to be very sure that everything goes alright, which might be better in other cases where something might have gone wrong with the file, we can do so. We would do something like the following. Now I have more time to show you. So tile entity, then we can call it tile, I don't know, and then we get this part here. Right. Then we might want to make sure that we actually found a tile entity, which should be the case, but we can't actually be certain about that. And we also want to make sure that this tile is actually a tile entity bomb. It should be. We just set it up here, but in other cases something might have gone wrong. We just check it when we want to see the texture. That means we didn't just set it, and well, something might have gone wrong with the world. Maybe it's corrupted or something, so we don't want it to crash. So what we're doing here is being a bit more secure, you can say. We get the tile entity first, we make sure that we actually found something, and we also make sure that we found something of the correct type. Okay, so what do we do with this bomb? Well, it's fairly simple. We set its level. Like that. So what I have here is we create a new block, we place a new block with that ID when we want to spread. Then we get the tile entity, and if that is of the correct type, we can get the tile entity bomb. Then we can just refer to its level and set it to the current level of this tile entity. Remember, we're referring to the other tile entity now, and we have set it to the same level that we had, but +1. And we can do so because, well, it's here, and, well, it's private, but we're referring to it inside, well, our own class, so it's private, so we can do that. And we can do this between different types of tile entities, of course, as well, but then we would have to make it protected or public, or just add some methods that were public that would interact with the fields. So there you go. We're increasing the level each time it spreads, and if it reaches level 3 it's not going to spread anymore. Let's take a look. Right. Okay, there you go. And we load it. And now it should be a bit more secure to use this thing. I'm not going to have to... I don't think that it was this was broken just because it didn't update the edges. It was just not done yet, as you saw it just spread the last bit there. So now I can, without a problem, just place it here, and it should spread 3 times, so we will get 4 different levels. And after it has spread 3 different times, it should stop. There you go. So 2 times, we have 3 different levels, and now it should spread the 3rd time. Now it should stop. We can wait for 5 seconds and see that it won't spread anymore. Why won't it spread? Well, we will increase the level each time we spread, and when we reach level 3, we don't want to spread anymore, and that leaves us at this very well form here. So these won't of course change their icon, because, well, they are of course idle, but they never spread, so we never reach the code for setting them idle. So this will still have their normal texture, and that's how I like it to look. So there we go. We've forgotten about one thing though. It's a bomb, isn't it? Bombs usually explode. Shouldn't we make it explode? I believe we should. Okay, so how do we set this up? Well, first of all, I want to define 2 constants, so it's going to be easy to refer to. I want to have private static final int spread time, and I set that to 100. What that is basically this part here. We're going to use it in another location as well. And then what I also want is private static final int spread levels, and that's basically how many times it should spread. Spread times would maybe make more sense, but then we would have spread time and spread times, and that would be a bit confusing, so I think spread levels would make more sense in this case. So that's how many levels it will spread. There you go. So now it's not doing anything different, but if we head here and do this code, so else if timer equals spread time times level, subtract the spread levels, like that. And what we have now is we take the level, we subtract it with the total amount of levels, and then we multiply it with the time. So what we get is, for instance, if this is the first level, we just place this block, then we have 0 minus 3. Multiply it with 100, that's minus 300. That means that 3 spreads later, after it spread itself, we're going to run this code. For the bomb with level 1, we will get 1 minus 3 equals minus 2 times 100 equals minus 200. So that will run this code 2 spreads later on, and so on. And then we get to the one with level 3, so we get 3 minus 3 equals 0, so we get when the timer equals 0, and that's actually going to work, because this code is not going to be executed, or well, that code, because the level is not a valid level. So all of the different bombs are going to trigger this code at the very same moment. Or well, that's actually a lie. If we take a closer look on this code, we're actually going to realize that the bombs with, for instance, level 0 will run this code 1 tick before the one at level 1, and the one at level 1 will run 1 tick before the one at level 2. But we could change that if we wanted to, but I think it looks better this way. So what do we want to do? Well, of course, we want to create an explosion, and it's fairly easy actually. First of all, we want to give it entity where we want this to be exploded, but I don't want that. We can just give it a null there, and then we want to give it the coordinates where it should happen, and that's just the coordinate of the block. I'm going to add 0.5 at each dimension here, because we want it to be in the center of the block rather than just in one corner, like that, like that. And finally, we want to give it how big the explosion should be. I think 4 is good. I think that's a TNT, if I can remember properly. And then if we set this to true, it's going to remove blocks when it explodes. Otherwise, it will look like it explodes, but it won't remove any blocks. So what we have here is multiple tile entities that are interacting with each other, spreading out, and by having their timers trying to reach different points, they are sort of synchronizing in a way, so they will all explode at almost the same time. The inner ones will explode a bit before the outer ones, like it will explode from within. So I said it was a weird bomb. It's called a weird bomb. We need to save that. And what it does, it's spreading out and then explodes from within. And yes, if you use the create explosion method there with enormous values, it's not going to look good. It's going to be like a square. If I can remember correctly. No, this looks very weird. So let's see. It's not intended to do so. The highest value that is used in vanilla is like 6 or something like that. I don't know. Okay, so now it should spread out to a specific point, and then the timers should, well, all reach their explosion point, and it should explode like that. As we can see, it, however, dropped some of the blocks because it just sort of destroyed itself and dropped them, which is not the very best. But before we fixed that, I thought that we could have some fun. Learning is all good, but having fun is also good, or well, you doing both at the same time is probably the best. So what I'm going to do is just change these constants here. Instead of spreading after 100 ticks, let's make it spread after 5 ticks. Instead of just spreading 3 times, let's spread, say, 30 times. And then let's run it. So what will this do? Well, it will do exactly the same. It will spread out and then explode. So what will we do this? Well, we probably shouldn't do something like this. We're creating a ton of blocks in a very rapid way, and then we're just exploding all over the place. We're going to create an insane amount of blocks, but for testing things, it's obviously all right. We're just doing it on our own. In a proper mod, you might not want to do this. You're putting quite a lot of pressure on the server if you do this a lot. But what we have is something like this, and like I said, it's good to have some fun in sometimes. So as you can see, it lags a bit, but the trick. But we still have this problem here. It drops the some of the blocks here, like that, and then we can fix that in a very simple way. It isn't anything specific for the tile entities. The only thing we'll have to do is override something here in the block method. Public int ID dropped. We'll get the metadata. We'll get the random. We get the fortune. So the random generator we can use if we want to randomly drop things. The metadata is the metadata of the block, and the fortune is if someone destroys this using a fortune pick or something like that. What I'm going to do is return -1. Returning -1 means that we don't want to drop anything at all. You might think that, well, we can check if the metadata is 1, and if so, we don't drop anything. That means that it is idle. But I don't think that's a good idea. If we place a block, it's going to spread out a lot. If we destroy a block that is still active, what would we get it back? It's still being spread out. It would just be cheap and free blocks basically. So since it's starting to expand away, I don't see a reason of allowing the user to pick it up at any point. Of course, we could check the metadata and well, check it out and drop items dependingly. So if the metadata tells us that we, well, haven't started spreading yet, and we might want to drop the block, otherwise we don't want, and yeah, and so on. And yeah, I get in the chat, what about redstone activation? Well, the questions and exercises document from, well, for this lecture is, well, having a further explorations where it is all about working a bit further here, and you can totally add redstone activation to it. That's further exploration 1, if I'm not mistaken. If we take a look, we still get the dirt blocks here, but we don't get the other blocks, because when one of these are broken now, we don't, well, we won't, this is a mess, it won't drop any of the blocks. And like I say, this is going to be quite heavy on the server, so don't overdo this. Of course, when we just play around, it's totally fine. Right, so that's actually everything for today. Let's see what we have been talking about. So, we started off with this. How do we do it with the actual block to define a tile entity? Well, we can extend block container. That's the best thing. I would recommend that part, because that's going to contain a few methods that is going to work good with the client events, the block client events, so we can reach them in the tile entity, and it's also going to remove tile entities when the block is removed, and so on. So we basically get some basic functionality already defined. But if we can't do that because we want to extend another block, as we can see in the second line there, where we have block bomb extends block whatever, then block whatever might not extend block container, but we still want to extend, well, we still want a tile entity. Well, then we can implement IL tile entity provider, which is actually the one we're after in both the cases, because block container is implementing that. But then we need to make sure that we remove the tile entity when we're done, and send along some events if we want to, and set that it has a container, and so on and so forth. Right. And finally, just because we're implementing a tile entity provider in some way, we need to return a new tile entity in the method create new tile entity. We get the world there as well if we want to check something and return different things depending on the world. But there we go. The next thing that we want to do is, well, register a tile entity. We do game registry.register tile entity, and we just give it the class, not an instance, the class of the tile entity, and a key to refer to. So it's using that for saving, for instance, and keeping track of the different tile entities. So we need to register that, and then it's just a matter of extending the tile entity class to, well, to create a tile entity. Of course, we'll add a lot of content to it to make it do things. For instance, we have 2 fields here and a update entity method. The update entity will tick each tick, well, run each tick is probably a better way to call it. And yeah, there we can do stuff. We can do whatever we want to. We can have a timer, we can check if something has been updated, or we might not want to use the update entity at all. We might want to use some other methods in the tile entity if we want to. But if we want to refer to values, we can just store them as fields. We have here private int timer and private int level, and that's totally fine, because blocks, well, for blocks we just have one base block that we refer to, but if we use tile entities, we will get a new instance for each location. That means that if we have a field here, then we can just modify it, and it will be unique for this very location. Just because we have multiple tile entity instances. Right, then we have this NBT thingy, which we use to save and load values. We have public void write to NBT, and then we get to compound, and make sure that you send that along to the superclass so it can save it properly there as well. It's going to say which type of tile entity you have, so you can load it properly again. It's going to say where in the world it is, and so on. But then we just set our own value here. We do compound and set short. If we want to set a short value, I give it a name, timer here, and then the value itself. You can do set boolean, set double, set float, set int, set long, set int array. There are plenty of things you can do that. Set string as well. So just save the things you need there, and then we can just read from MBT, where we do the same thing. We call the superclass as well, so it can read the information, so it know where to be placed and so on. But then we just read the things with the same types and the same names. So simply did set short with the name timer, then we use get short with the name timer, and we will get that value. And if we've done this, we will save the values when the server stops and load them back again when we load the server afterwards. Then if we wanted to have different icons, we could use the get block texture, where we use iblock axis, and then X, Y, and Z on the side. So what we did here was just to get the tile entity at a specific location, and then we just use that to refer to if it was idle or not. Of course, we had a few problems with this because we wanted to synchronize it properly, and that is not a problem with this method. It just has to do with us syncing the data properly. So in the end, we actually did with the went with the method that we used last time, where we just used the metadata. So we set the metadata depending on if it was idle or not, which is a clever way of, well, doing the synchronization without having to bother about it too much. Otherwise, we would have to do it manually. And finally, we had the client events, which we of course didn't use either because we used the metadata in a clever way. But what we can have here is we can do world object dot add block event, give it the coordinates, give it the ID, and finally an ID and a value of the actual event. Then we get that in the receive client event, and we can just check that. So we did world object dot is remote, and that the ID is the one we wanted, and then we can just do things like that. And if we want to force a render update to tell it, well, you should probably recalculate your textures and so on, then we could do so with mark block for render update. If we wanted to reach the client, which I guess we won't, we need to return true. That makes sure that the server sends it along to the client side as well. Right, that's about it. We have some questions and exercises, and one of the further explorations, like I already mentioned, was to make this weird bomb being triggered by redstone instead. Then we of course have questions and exercises, like always. Questions to see if you've learned what we have been talking about, whereas exercises are to practice the things we have been talking about. So practice and see if you, well, can do the things yourself. So those are writing programs, while the questions are, well, answering questions. There are answers and possible solutions in the end, but that's about it for today. This has been Forging a Minecraft Mod, lecture number 4, blocks and tile entities. I've been VSWE, and I hope you enjoyed it. Next time we're going to talk about entities rather than tile entities, which is a different subject entirely. I'll see you then.